friends, let me introduce our last speaker. Actually, this is something new that we're trying to institute in Why Not. In the past, we've all had speakers until the end, but this time we wanted to get a reactor. So para maiba naman, our last speaker is also a reactor. We've asked him to use his K, karanasan at karapatan, to talk about all of the talks and from his own experience, and maybe help us wrap up tonight. And of course, our why not question, why not a reimagination? Friends, Howie Severino has been a full-time journalist for the past 21 years. Previously, he was a high school teacher and a government speechwriter in the Aquino administration, I think for Secretary Bengson at that time. He has won awards in news reporting, documentary making, investigative journalism, and his leadership in journalism. In fact, he is already in the Hall of Fame of the Rotary Club of Manila's Journalism Awards. Last May 2009, he was appointed editor-in-chief of www.gmanews.tv, one of the leading news websites in the Philippines. Mga kaibigan, Mr. Howie Severino.
Oh no, I don't need that. Thank you so much for the invitation and that generous introduction, Bam. And Timmy, thank you for following up constantly. I'm not that forgetful, though. I made sure I put it in my calendar. Actually, I didn't know what to expect. I was told to react to the speakers. I didn't know this would also be a reunion. I first met some of the speakers and some of the other people in this audience in my youth, in our youth. I met Risa, Rapa, I see Lino there, Chito Gascon in the streets when we were young activists in the 1980s. So my first reaction for today is, you all look great for your age. Thank you for making me feel young again. Okay. If there's a theme for all of these talks, I think it would be going against the tide. Going against the tide. As Bam mentioned, they usually don't invite politicians, the traditional, conventional politicians. They made sure they invited someone who was going against the tide. I think that that reflects everybody else who spoke today. Well, I learned so much from the speakers, and I hope I don't do an injustice by boiling down my reactions to a few keywords that resonated with me and my own personal experiences in trying to go against the tide myself. Well, Paco, I just met him here. I guess he's of a younger generation, but he's a very impressive man. I mean, a PhD from Stanford, etc. And but I think the most impressive thing is that he decided to come home. And he raised a very important question among many educated Filipinos. It's the kind of question I think that goes back to Jose Rizal. Why go home? Diba? Spain was a great place for Rizal. He was widely respected there, and I'm sure the Bay Area was a great place for you, Silicon Valley. It resonated with me because I also studied in the United States earlier than you, I presume, 1980s. And I asked myself the same question, why should I go home? Well, various things happened, and I'll explain that a little later. But essentially, my parents lived in the States at that time, and they wanted me to stay in the United States, work for a bank, and eventually live the American dream of two-car garage and having my kids go to a private school, etc. I had long talks with them. My mother cried, but I was, I was very young, and I wasn't very materialistic in those days. So I did go home against the tide, which was at that time my parents' wishes. And when I came home, the common reaction to my decision, I don't know if it was a common reaction to your decision, was, boy, are you dumb? Those conditions that you described, I mean, they existed in 1984 when I came back. And then the second reaction was, after they got over my dumbness, what a sacrifice. Boy, what a sacrifice. You know, you're sacrificing the American dream and being able to earn in dollars, etc. Being able to, at that time, there were no McDonald's in the Philippines. That's how old I am. So the opportunity to eat in McDonald's every day. But you know, I came home to be a teacher 25 years ago, and I see one of my former co-teachers here, Mike Gomez, Timmy's Tito. So that was 25 years ago, and I have to say, and I can't say this for everyone who has come home, but it was one of the smartest decisions I ever made. I say that very honestly. It was one of the smartest decisions I ever made, and I don't feel I made any sacrifice at all. I don't feel I made any sacrifice at all. Not even material, actually, because I wasn't really living a luxurious life in the United States either. Actually left the US at a time of recession. But just in terms of the experiences of witnessing history, the kind of friendships that I made, the kind of people I've gotten to know in those 25 years, I've gained so much, much more than anything I could have lost by leaving the United States. Anyway, the flip side of that question, why should I go home, is should I leave? Should I leave? When you discussed that question, I immediately thought of a conversation I had with a young colleague in my office who was being brought to the United States by her parents. You know, they just got their green card or something, and she really, really wants to stay. She just graduated. She really wants to stay in the Philippines. She loves this country, and she's really torn, but you know, her parents want her to go, so she's leaning towards going just to make her parents happy. And you know, she was crying. You know, it is a crying matter to leave your country. You know, basically I told her, you know, well, you should listen to your parents. It's your life. It's your life, and you're going to have to live with the decision you make now. You know, whether you choose being a U.S. citizen or a Filipino or staying a Filipino citizen, you know, for the rest of your life. So I just told her to think about it, and I told her about my own experience. It's not replicable to everyone else's, but I told her, you know, I left. I decided to leave. I came back, and I have no regrets about staying. Si Major Dennis Clarin is one of the more engaging military officers I've met, to say the least. And I've met quite a number. In my journalism career, I've spent a lot of time with soldiers in the field. I've slept in military camps in the field, not just Camp Aguinaldo, but detachments, you know, from northern Luzon to Jolo, Basilan. So I don't have the kind of knee-jerk reaction to soldiers that he described. I don't necessarily think of them as martial law monsters or being rigid. I assure you, 90 to 95% of the soldiers in our armed forces are pretty decent people. It's just that 5% that give the military a bad name. But one of the things that he told me, that he said, that he talked about resonated with me, and it's something that I want to mention right now. He talked about risk. He talked about risk. And normally, when a military man talks about risk, you know, it's physical risk, you know, the risk of going to combat and fighting enemies, etc. But he talked about the risk of going against the tide in the military. I'm not sure if I was interpreting everything he was saying very sharply. I think we had to read somewhere in between the lines. He did mention that he was floating for some reason. Maybe Bam can whisper to me later. But I do know that a lot of idealistic, intelligent, even West Point educated soldiers have taken risks, have made a stand, And not only are some of them floating, but some of them have been detained, including his, one of his senior officers, General Danny Lim. So, and one of the things he said was, we cannot kill our way to victory. We cannot kill our way to victory. I haven't met too many soldiers say that because they're trained killers. That's their job. It's their profession to kill the enemy, to finish a mission. But he seems to have a wider perspective. I think that was his call, I think, for all of us, to widen our perspective, to get out of our comfort zones, to risk being made to float in our own little ponds or bureaucracies. But, I mean, if I were part of the audience, well, I was actually, but didn't get a chance to ask if he has said the same thing. You know, we cannot kill our way to victory, to General Palparan. I don't know, maybe Representative Barakel has said the same thing to her colleague many times. It takes courage for a soldier to talk about being a renegade. It takes a lot of courage, to, you know, and renegadism. I wasn't exactly sure what he meant, but then towards the end, he did say that our job doesn't mean, being renegade doesn't mean burning the house down. But I wonder if he would also preclude evicting people from the house. Well, Risa, actually, I am a big admirer. I've been an admirer since I was quite young, and and I heard her sing. So she was one of those activists who knew how to sing. Not too many of them can. Gosh, I liked her presentation. It was a platform. Basically, it was a political platform without hard sell. That's what I liked about it. You know, everyone knows that she's an activist, but talking about, you know, an activist state, an activist government, a nation of activism, I mean, that's a point of view. That's a political point of view, as opposed to conservative and, you know, a do-nothing state or even a strong republic. And she called on us to imagine a better country and a nation of activists. And of course, the death of Cory meant a lot to her and to us. It's the passing of an era. And I guess the torch has been passed to people like yourselves, people like me, I suppose. That's what I got from it. And then you emphasize change from below. You know, as opposed to just changing leaderships, you know, change has to come from within, from below. I mean, that's something I've been hearing for a long time, but there are actually people in Congress who are trying to make that come true. And it was just a very eloquent presentation. So for whatever it's worth, you have my vote. Si Rapa naman, I have to, my first reaction to him was even before he even said a word. And I said, pare, bilib ako sa'yo. I know that he was one of the main organizers of the, you know, the astonishing week that was the wake and the funeral procession. It was a very emotional event for for many of us, but what also struck me was how well organized it was. And my hat's off to you, Rapa. It was just a class act from start to finish. It really set an example of what Filipinos can do. I mean, people have been talking about, how undisciplined we are, and we've talked about the traffic and poverty and everything. But that week, I think people showed, or Filipinos showed, rich and poor, important, not so important, a better version of ourselves. And I like to think that that better version of ourselves is part of our DNA, is part of our national DNA. And I think that's the main legacy of Cory and Ninoy, that they, through their example and what they did, they imprinted nobility in our national DNA. And it's there, and it's in our politics. It might be dormant, but it's ready to spring to action, at some trigger, as Risa said, or some kind of tipping point, maybe. But it's there because we have felt it, we've experienced it, we've witnessed it. So it's not a matter of our nature that we're, with these problems that we're confronting. I think a better politics, a more noble politics is within us. And I don't think it's going to take that long because we actually experienced it. From 83 to 86, I mean, it was pretty clear, di ba? Yung black and white, I mean, there was good, there was evil. So, yun nga eh, I think what the past 25 years has shown, or 26 years has shown, is that there's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the Filipino, and there's a side of us that's, that's selfish and doesn't think of anything beyond our families. Somebody here mentioned that, what would you be willing to die for? Someone mentioned family. I think that's natural for most people. That's what they would be willing to die for. I noticed nobody's raised their hand to say country. But I think what these speakers are telling us is that, we have to start thinking of our country in the same way that we think of our families. And we have to love our country in the same way that we love our families. And, if our families somehow became dysfunctional, we wouldn't abandon our families. We would help our families become functional again. And I think we're just going through a period of dysfunction. But there was a time when we were functional, that we knew what to do, that we knew we could tell as a people good from evil. And I think that was the real value of August 1 to August 5, and even up to now, there's quite a bit of that Cory magic left. I think that's the real value of that it reminded us of that other side, that better version of ourselves. And I see Bam here, and I remember the movie I saw last night. If you haven't seen it, I think it's showing on TV tomorrow night. Ninoy's Last Journey. They should have put more makeup on you, though, because he looked too young in the movie, but I can imagine him right now seeing you. And I think that's Ninoy and Cory's biggest legacy, that there are people like yourselves, that there are people like Bam, Timmy, the other people who organized this event, the speakers, people like Risa in Congress, people like Paco who decided to come home, Rapa, who has an amazing organizational skill driven by, just passion. Chito Gascon is sitting back there quietly, but I've been a big admirer of his for years as well. I think that's the real value of the last few weeks, and I hope we don't forget what has happened, what we've experienced, what we've witnessed, especially for the younger people in the audience. Once upon a time, our country had noble leaders, and I think we can have them again, because there are people in this room who have shown that nobility. So thank you very much.